The Star Wanderer sat alone in the darkest corner of Outpost 7's spaceport, covered in space dust, and looking very out of place among the sleek alien ships. It was an old Earth cargo ship, built in the days when humans were just beginning to reach for the stars. Its dark gray hull was scratched and dented, telling stories of countless adventures through space. A group of tall, blue-skinned aliens walked past the ship, pointing and laughing at its simple design. "Look at those primitive thrusters," one of them said, shaking his head. "And those manual control systems. How did humans ever reach space using such basic technology?" But Mike Thompson saw something different when he looked at the Star Wanderer. Where others saw junk, he saw possibilities. He stood there in his worn leather jacket, running his hand along the ship's hull, feeling every bump and dent. 20 years of flying through space had taught him that sometimes the simplest things work the best. "How much for the old Earth ship?" Mike asked the port manager, a small green alien with 4 arms who was busy typing on multiple screens at once. The port manager looked up, surprised that anyone would be interested in such an outdated vessel. "That thing. It's been sitting here for 3 years. Nobody wants it. The owner never came back after some trouble with space pirates." He waved one of his arms dismissively. 5,000 credits, and it's yours. Though I don't know why you'd want it." Mike smiled and pulled out his credit chip. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways," he said, making the payment before the port manager could change his mind. A small crowd of aliens gathered to watch as Mike began his inspection of the ship. They whispered and pointed, some even taking pictures to share with their friends. A human actually buying this ancient vessel was quite entertaining to them. "A human," called out a red-scaled alien merchant. "I have a much better ship for sale. Top-of-the-line neural interface, AI-assisted navigation, quantum drive engines. Why waste your money on this museum piece?" Mike just kept working, checking the ship's systems one by one. He climbed into the cockpit, his hands running over the physical controls, the steering yoke, the throttle levers, the actual buttons and switches. No neural interfaces here, no AI assistance, just pure, direct connection between pilot and ship. The ship's engines coughed to life for the first time in years, sending a deep rumble through the spaceport. A few of the watching aliens jumped back, surprised that the old ship could even start. Mike ran through the startup sequence, and one by one, the Star Wanderer's systems came online. The port manager rushed over, worried. "Are you sure this thing is safe to fly? Our scanners show it's almost 50 years old." "She's not just safe," Mike replied, patting the ship's hull. "She's solid, built in the days when we couldn't rely on AI to save us if something went wrong. Every system has a manual backup. Every part can be fixed with basic tools. Ships like this taught humans how to really fly in space." The crowd watched with a mixture of amusement and concern as Mike began running the pre-flight checks. The Star Wanderer's engines hummed louder, and its old hull creaked as systems pressurized. Some of the aliens were taking bets on whether the ship would even lift off. But Mike knew better. He had learned to fly on ships like this, back when human spaceflight still required skill, instinct, and a deep understanding of your vessel. The Star Wanderer might be old, but she was built by humans who knew that space was unforgiving, and the simplest solution was often the most reliable. As the sun set on Outpost 7, Mike finished his preparations. Tomorrow, he would show them all what this primitive ship could really do. Because sometimes, the oldest tools in human hands could still surprise the galaxy. The morning light sparkled off the shining hulls of the most advanced ships in the galaxy. They were all gathered at Outpost 7 for the biggest racing event of the year, the Grand Nebula Circuit. Pilots and crews bustled around their vessels, making final adjustments to their quantum engines and checking their AI systems. Mike stood in line at the registration desk, holding the Star Wanderer's old paper manual. The alien behind the desk, a tall purple being with silver eyes, looked up at him and then down at his documents. "There must be a mistake," the alien said, frowning at the registration form. "This ship, It's not even equipped with a basic AI system. How do you plan to navigate the course? With these, Mike replied, wiggling his fingers with a smile. Human hands and human eyes. The old-fashioned way. The alien looked around nervously. Sir, this is the Grand Nebula Circuit. We have ships here that cost more than some planets. Their pilots are connected directly to their ships through neural links. They can process navigation data faster than. Does it say anywhere in the rules that a ship must have AI or neural interfaces? Mike interrupted politely. The alien checked the rulebook and had to admit it didn't. With obvious reluctance, they stamped Mike's entry form and handed him his race number, 127. As Mike walked back to his ship, he passed the race favorites. The Diamond Arrow, piloted by the famous racer Blue Swift, gleamed like a perfect crystal. Next to it was the Quantum Ghost, whose hull seemed to shift between dimensions. Their crews stopped working to stare at Mike and his old Earth ship. Hey, everyone, called out Blue Swift, his antenna twitching with amusement. Look who thinks they can race. A human in a cargo ship. The gathered aliens burst into laughter. Mike kept walking, but he couldn't help smiling. They didn't understand that human pilots had raced through asteroid fields and solar storms long before AI existed. They had no idea how many tricks the primitive humans had developed. The race organizers called all pilots to the briefing room. The course appeared as a hologram in the center. A challenging route through the nearby nebula, filled with gravitational anomalies, radiation storms, and dense asteroid fields. Your ship's AIs will receive the course data directly, the race director announced. He noticed Mike raising his hand. Yes, Pilot 127. Could I get the course data on a standard display screen? Mike asked. My ship uses manual controls. The room fell silent for a moment before breaking into poorly hidden chuckles and whispers. The race director blinked all four of his eyes in surprise. Of course, he said finally. Though I must warn you, the course changes are transmitted in real time during the race. Without an AI, you'll be flying partly blind. Just like the old days, Mike replied cheerfully. Back on Earth, we call that making it interesting. As the pilots filed out of the briefing room, Mike overheard them making bets, not on whether he would win, but on how long it would take him to quit the race. Some doubted he would even make it past the starting line. Back at the Star Wanderer, Mike began his preparations. While other ships hummed with electronic signals and quantum calculations, he went through his pre-race checklist the human way, checking every system by hand, feeling the response of every control, listening to the sound of his engines. An announcement echoed through the spaceport, all ships to starting positions in 1 hour. Mike patted his ship's control panel, ready to show them what humans can do. Old girl. The Star Wanderer's engines rumbled in response, a sound that reminded him of an old Earth muscle car, raw power without fancy electronics. Sometimes, he thought, the galaxy needed a reminder that humans hadn't reached the stars by waiting for perfect technology. They had done it with courage, skill, and the willingness to try what everyone else thought impossible. In the final hour before the race, while other pilots connected their minds to their ships through glowing neural cables, Mike sat quietly in the Star Wanderer's cockpit. His hands moved across the controls in a practice dance, memorizing the feeling of each switch and lever one last time. A soft knock on his ship's hull interrupted his preparation. Outside stood a young alien reporter, her skin shifting colors with excitement as she held up a recording device. Pilot Thompson, she said, I'm from Galactic Sports Network. Our viewers are very curious. Why do you refuse to use neural interfaces? Every other pilot says they're essential for modern space racing. Mike gestured for her to come inside the cockpit. Look at these controls, he said, pointing to the worn steering yoke. See these marks here? That's where thousands of human hands have gripped it over the years. Each scratch tells a story of a pilot learning to feel their way through space. The reporter's skin turned a confused yellow. But neural interfaces give you perfect control. They let you feel every part of your ship instantly. "That's the problem," Mike replied, starting his engine check. "They feel too perfect. Space isn't perfect. It's wild, unpredictable. Sometimes you need human instinct more than computer precision." As if to prove his point, the Star Wanderer's engine coughed and then settled into a deep rumble. Mike adjusted the throttle slightly, listening to the sound. "Hear that? The engine's running a bit rough on the left side. A neural interface would show me perfect readings, but my ears tell me exactly what's wrong." The reporter watched in fascination as Mike pulled out a small toolkit and made a manual adjustment to the fuel mix. The engine's rumble smoothed out immediately. "But how will you process all the race data?" she asked. "The course changes constantly. The other pilots rely on their ship's AIs to calculate the best routes." Mike smiled and pointed to his head. "Humans were calculating space routes long before computers existed. We learned to read solar winds, to feel gravitational pulls, to navigate by starlight. Sure, it's not as fast as an AI, but sometimes the direct way isn't the best way." A voice boomed over the spaceport speakers. 30 minutes to race start. All pilots to final positions." The reporter's skin flickered with multiple colors. "One last question. What do you say to those who think you're just trying to get attention? Some are calling this a publicity stunt." Mike's hands moved across the control panel, bringing more systems online. The Star Wanderer hummed with power, not the high-pitched whine of quantum engines, but the deep throb of classic human engineering. "I say watch closely," he answered, "because they're about to see how humans flew before we had computers to do our thinking for us." After the reporter left, Mike pulled out a worn paper notebook, another primitive human tool that had drawn laughs from the other pilots. In it were hand-drawn maps of stellar phenomena, notes about gravitational eddies, and calculations done the old human way with pencil and paper. "They've forgotten," he muttered to himself, "that humans reached the stars before we had all these fancy tools. We did it with math, courage, and the ability to feel our way through space." The Star Wanderer's hull creaked as the ship powered up fully. Other pilots might see these noises as signs of weakness, but to Mike, they were his ship talking to him. Every sound, every vibration, every slight pull in the controls, they all told him something important. As the final minutes ticked down, Mike thought about all the human pilots who had come before him. The ones who had first ventured into space with nothing but slide rules and gut instinct. The ones who had mapped the stars by hand and found paths through the darkness by feel alone. "Time to remind the galaxy," he said quietly, gripping the controls, "that sometimes the old ways are still the best ways." The starting line was a ribbon of light stretching across space. 27 ships hovered in formation, their engines glowing in different colors. The Star Wanderer sat at the back, its simple thrusters standing out among the quantum drives and plasma engines. "Race start in 10 seconds, announced the control tower. Mike's hands tightened on the controls. Around him, other pilots lay back in their neural chairs, their minds already merged with their ship's computers. But Mike sat up straight, eyes focused on the asteroid field ahead. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Begin. The advanced ships shot forward like arrows, their AI systems calculating perfect trajectories through space. The Star Wanderer's start was slower, its engines roaring with old-fashioned power. Many spectators were already turning away, assuming the race was over for the human pilot. They were wrong. As the ships entered the asteroid field, Mike saw something the AIs didn't. Years of manual flying had taught him to spot patterns in chaos, while the other ships flew straight paths between the rocks, carefully calculated by their computers. Mike took a different approach. "Let's show them how they used to do this," he muttered, pulling the Star Wanderer into a tight turn around a large asteroid. Instead of fighting the rock's gravity, he used it to slingshot his ship forward, picking up speed without using extra fuel. The alien spectators watched in confusion as the old Earth ship started to move differently from the others. Where they flew in straight, efficient lines, the Star Wanderer danced. It spun through narrow gaps, rolled around spinning rocks, and seemed to flow through space like water. "What is the human doing?" asked one race announcer. He's using the asteroid's gravity fields," said another in surprise. "Look at his speed readings." Mike grinned as he threaded his ship through a gap barely wider than his hull. The Star Wanderer's old metal frame groaned, but held firm. Ahead, he could see the eye-controlled ships following their perfect, pre-calculated paths. But space wasn't perfect. A small asteroid, too small for the AIs to consider important, crashed into a larger one. The collision sent a spray of rocks across the course. The AI ships, stuck in their programmed routes, had to stop and recalculate. Mike didn't need to calculate. He saw the pattern of debris and reacted instantly, turning the Star Wanderer sideways to slip through a gap between the rocks. His hands moved across the controls instinctively, making tiny adjustments based on feel rather than computer readings. "Impossible," shouted one of the race officials. "The human ship has moved into 8th place." The alien audiences at viewing stations throughout the galaxy leaned forward in surprise. The primitive Earth ship was not only surviving, it was competing. They watched as Mike used more old human tricks, letting his ship's wings brush against asteroid ice to help with turns, using the wake of larger rocks to hide from solar winds. "This is how we did it before computers," Mike said to himself, feeling every vibration through his ship's controls. Every asteroid is an opportunity. Every gravitational pull is a tool. As the first leg of the race neared its end, the Star Wanderer had moved up to 6th place. The alien ships were faster in straight lines, but Mike's human piloting style had proven perfect for the asteroid field. The race officials were frantically checking their rulebooks, unable to believe that such primitive flying techniques could be so effective. But they could find no rules against using asteroids for gravity assists, or against the fluid, instinctive style of human piloting. As Mike guided his ship out of the asteroid field, he could hear excited chatter on the racing frequencies. The aliens were trying to understand how a human pilot with no neural interface, no AI, and no quantum computers had just outflown some of the most advanced ships in the galaxy. But Mike knew the answer was simple. Sometimes the most powerful computer was the human brain, and the best interface was 2 hands on the controls and 2 eyes on the stars ahead. The second leg of the race started smoothly enough. The Star Wanderer held its 6th place position as the ships entered a vast purple nebula. Mike noticed something the others didn't: the way the gases swirled in strange patterns, how the stars seemed to flicker oddly in the distance. "That's not good," he muttered, recognizing the signs from his years of manual spaceflight. "Ion storm coming." As if answering his words, the race controller's voice crackled over the radio. "Warning to all pilots. Massive ion storm detected ahead. Recommended course adjustment will be transmitted to your ship's A." The transmission cut off as the storm hit. Brilliant green and blue lightning flashed across space. The storm's electromagnetic energy played havoc with ship's systems. Ahead of Mike, he could see the advanced alien vessels starting to struggle. Their neural interfaces buzzed with static. Their quantum computers struggled to process the chaotic energy patterns. Some pilots, too dependent on their AI systems, found themselves nearly blind as their advanced sensors overloaded. But Mike Thompson was flying the old way. No neural interface to scramble his brain. No quantum computer to confuse. Just his eyes, his hands, and his instincts. "Time to remember those Earth sailing ships," he said, recalling his history lessons. Ancient sailors had learned to read storms, to work with the wind instead of fighting it. Space wasn't so different. You just had to know how to read the signs. The Star Wanderer's simple systems were actually an advantage now. While other ships tried to power through the storm, Mike watched the flow of ionized gas like old sailors had watched the waves. He noticed how the storm created currents in space, just like ocean currents on Earth. "Let's ride the lightning," he said, turning his ship to match the storm's flow. Instead of fighting the ionic currents, he used them to push his ship forward. The Star Wanderer surfed the waves of energy like a boat on the ocean. Alien observers watched in amazement as the old Earth ship began to move faster through the storm, while their advanced vessels struggled. 3 ships ahead of Mike had to drop out of the race as their AI systems crashed completely. "Look at the human," the race announcer exclaimed. "They're using the storm's energy patterns for propulsion. How are they navigating without computer assistance?" Mike smiled as he heard the confusion in their voices. He was using techniques developed by the first human space pilots, who had learned to read the stars and space phenomena with their own eyes. Every flash of lightning showed him the storm's pattern. Every crackle of energy told him which way the currents were flowing. "Your fancy computers tell you what's happening," he said to himself, hands dancing across the manual controls. "But sometimes you need to feel it instead." The Star Wanderer's hull groaned as it rode another wave of ionic energy. Some warning lights flashed on the simple control panel, but Mike knew his ship could handle it. It was built in the days when humans had to make things strong, because they couldn't rely on AI to avoid every danger. As the storm reached its peak, Mike saw his chance. A massive surge of ionic energy was building up ahead. Other pilots were turning away, their computers warning them of the danger. But Mike pointed the Star Wanderer straight at it. "Trust your instincts," he whispered, gripping the controls tightly. At exactly the right moment, he turned his ship into the surge. The energy caught the Star Wanderer like a surfer catching a wave, sending it hurtling forward at incredible speed. When the storm finally cleared, the race standings showed something that shocked the galaxy. The primitive Earth cargo ship had moved into 3rd place. The alien pilots, still recovering from their systems failures, couldn't understand how a human flying by hand had outperformed their advanced technology. But Mike knew. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, especially when nature reminded everyone that space wasn't meant to be tamed by computers alone. The race paused for repairs at a space station near the nebula's edge. Ships lined the docking bays, their crews rushing to fix systems damaged by the ion storm. But around the Star Wanderer, a different scene was unfolding. Alien pilots and engineers gathered around Mike's ship, their attitudes completely changed from the mockery of 2 days ago. Blue Swift, who had laughed the loudest at the start, now stood closest, watching Mike perform his manual system checks. "I don't understand," Blue Swift said, his antennae twitching with curiosity. "How did you know which way the storm would flow? Our best AI couldn't predict it." Mike looked up from the engine he was checking. "Human pilots learned to read space long before we had computers to do it for us. We studied how energy moves, how storms form, how gravity affects everything. We didn't have a choice. We had to understand it all ourselves." A group of alien engineers had brought up holographic displays showing recordings of the Star Wanderer's flight through the storm. They played the footage over and over, amazed by how the simple ship had moved. "Look here," one engineer said, pointing to a particular moment. "The human craft changes direction just before each energy surge. But how? There's no way their basic sensors could detect those surges in advance." "I felt them coming," Mike explained, wiping grease from his hands. "Just like sailors on Earth's oceans used to feel changes in the wind before they could see them. Space has its own patterns, its own rhythm. Sometimes you need to trust your instincts more than your instruments." The aliens exchanged glances. This idea of feeling space went against everything they had learned about modern spaceflight. Their entire training focused on letting computers handle the complex calculations and decisions. "Could you?" Blue Swift hesitated, then continued, "Could you show us how you do it?" Mike smiled and waved them into his ship. The aliens crowded into the simple cockpit, looking with new interest at the manual controls they had mocked earlier. "See this stick?" Mike said, holding the control yoke. "It's connected directly to the ship's steering systems. No computers in between. When something hits the ship, you feel it instantly. When you turn, you feel exactly how the ship responds." He guided their hands to feel the worn spots on the controls, showing them how years of human pilots had learned to understand their ships through touch. The aliens were surprised by how much information they could get just from the vibrations and resistance in the controls. But what about calculations? An engineer asked. Surely you can't process navigation data as fast as our computers. We don't need to, Mike replied. Humans learn to simplify. Instead of calculating every possible factor, we learned which ones really matter. Sometimes, trying to process too much information just slows you down. The station's warning system chimed, announcing 1 hour until the race would resume. As the aliens returned to their ships, they looked at their own technology differently. Some began disconnecting non-essential systems, wanting to try feeling their ships more directly. Maybe, Blue Swift said thoughtfully, we've been so focused on adding new technology that we forgot about understanding the basics. Mike watched as the alien pilots went back to their ships. Many were adjusting their neural interfaces, reducing the computer assistance. A few were even practicing with their manual backup controls, something they had never bothered with before. The race officials had been studying the recordings too. They announced a surprising rule change. For future races, all ships would be required to have functional manual controls. The galaxy was beginning to understand that there was more to spaceflight than just having the most advanced technology. As Mike prepared for the final leg of the race, he smiled. Sometimes the best teachers were the ones who seemed the most outdated at first. The Star Wanderer might not win the race, but it had already achieved something more important. It had taught the galaxy a lesson about the value of human ingenuity. The final standings of the Grand Nebula Circuit showed the Star Wanderer in 4th place. Blue Swift's Diamond Arrow had won, but the story everyone talked about wasn't the victory. It was the old Earth cargo ship that had changed how the galaxy thought about spaceflight. A week after the race, Mike sat in a large conference room at the Galactic Racing Academy. Hundreds of alien pilots and engineers filled the seats, all eager to learn about human piloting techniques. On the screen behind him, footage of the Star Wanderer dancing through the ion storm played on loop. The most important thing to understand, Mike explained, standing next to a hologram of his ship, is that space isn't just numbers and data. It's alive. It has patterns, moods, and rhythms. The first human pilots had to learn these patterns because they didn't have computers to rely on. The audience watched as he demonstrated old Earth techniques using a flight simulator. Many took notes as he showed them how to read the signs of an approaching ion storm, how to feel the pull of gravity without sensors, how to understand space phenomena using just their eyes and instincts. But surely these methods are less efficient, an alien student asked. Mike smiled. Sometimes the direct path isn't the best path. Sometimes you need to work with space instead of trying to calculate your way through it. After the lecture, Blue Swift approached Mike with news. The Racing Federation is changing the rules, he said, his antennae twitching excitedly. All pilots must now train in manual flight before they can race. They're calling it the Thompson Rule. Mike laughed at that, but the changes didn't stop there. Across the galaxy, space academies began adding human-style training to their programs. Pilots learned to fly both with and without computer assistance. Ship designers started building vessels that combined advanced technology with direct, manual controls. The Star Wanderer found a new home in the Galactic Museum of Spaceflight, placed in a special exhibit called The Human Touch. Visitors could sit in its cockpit, feel the worn controls, and understand how humans had first reached for the stars. One day, as Mike was teaching at the academy, a young alien student asked him, "Why didn't humans just wait until we had better technology? Wouldn't that have been easier?" Mike thought about all the early human pilots who had ventured into space with nothing but courage and simple machines. "Humans aren't very good at waiting," he replied with a smile. "We work with what we have." Sometimes that means finding creative solutions to problems. Sometimes it means trusting your instincts when the computers can't help. The student looked thoughtful. "Is that why the Star Wanderer's controls were so simple? To make you find creative solutions?" "Exactly," Mike said. "When you have limits, you learn to think differently. Every problem becomes an opportunity to try something new. Years later, the story of the Star Wanderer became required reading at space academies across the galaxy. Young pilots learned that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best ones, and that understanding the basics of spaceflight was just as important as having advanced technology. The ship that had once been mocked as a relic had become a symbol of something important: the unique human ability to adapt, to feel their way through problems, and to find elegant solutions in simple things. As for Mike Thompson, he continued teaching at the academy, showing new generations of pilots, both human and alien, that there was more than one way to fly among the stars. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would visit the Star Wanderer in its museum home, place his hands on the old controls, and remember the race that had taught the galaxy to respect the human way of doing things. Because in the end, the greatest technology wasn't the fastest computer or the most advanced AI. It was the combination of human heart, human mind, and human courage that had first carried Earth's children to the stars.